Okay, hello. So I'm kind of excited to show you something cool I've been working on. So if you don't know this project, Overmind is a project that will be released very soon. And it's like a next generation state management solution. It's the same kind of solution as Cerebral and Redux and MobX. It tries to solve the same challenge, which is having like an external state store to ease the development of building applications. The way it differs is that it uses modern web technology like proxies, and it's also written in TypeScript. And as we can see here on the website, it allows you to simply do, when you create actions to change state and do other logic, you simply create a function. It can be async, and you can do mutations safely inside these functions, even asynchronous changes. And it also has a functional API when you want to do do functional code instead of this typical imperative approach when the complexity of the logic increases. What I'm going to show you now is like an idea of one thing is making this part of the application super simple. But what if we could kind of like integrate this into the view to make that also as simple as possible? So what I've been working on, and this is actually running on this website currently, and it actually is a quite complex UI. All the examples here are run with a project called Marxy, which I actually wrote, but it allows any virtual DOM library to convert Markdown into actual virtual DOM. And as you can see, when I change out the view here, you see that the examples update. We can go to API and all this stuff. And it's actually a quite complex UI. There's tons of reconciliation stuff going on here. But as you can see, it does exactly what it's supposed to do. So what I did is that I actually implemented like my own React-ish, Preact-ish kind of thing, where you use JSX, and it has its own like virtual DOM and all that stuff, but it's very simple. But the really cool thing is that it integrates directly with Overmind. So here I have the application, and I have some state set up here, quite simple stuff. And I have some actions doing rather simple stuff. And I have my effects here for doing requests, and I do some CSS changes here. I'm changing out a CSS variable. But anyways, let's move down to the main file. Okay, so what I do here is that I import H and render from Overmind components, and this is written in TypeScript. And inside your TS config, you can use JSX factory to H. Like by default, it's React, but you can change this to whatever you want. And that allows me to write JSX. Though with the render function here, I actually have 3 arguments, where the first argument is the Overmind application. So I just pass that in. And if we have a look at, for example, app, we can see that I'm listed up the different pages here. I have a function. I'm doing some cool transition stuff to fade in the page. And then I have my component. And Overmind components is just functions. There's no class components at all, but it does implement the concept of hooks. So we're kind of like turning it around. Like Overmind is your main state store, but you have the possibility to create state in your components as like the use state. I can show an example. So you can have stateful components, but there are no class components. And what's also really cool is that you get the the state and the actions directly injected. So like every component has a children property. But with this view layer, overmind components, you also have a state and actions property that comes from the overmind application. So I can just point to all the state here as normal and also the actions. Now, what is really cool here is that overmind components automatically tracks any state used in any component. You don't have to connect anything. You just write your application and it will automatically track the state used in overmind and re-render a component when that state updates. So it's like a very simple, direct approach, which I think gives a really, really great developer experience. Like you start out with all your state in overmind, but wherever you need local state, you can do that. Instead of doing it the other way around, where you start building up your state inside components, and then you, at least in my experience, you have to bail out and you have to put that state inside the state store. This just gives you a ton of freedom without writing a bunch of code and refactoring a bunch of stuff. And as you can see, we have refs and we have effects, and these two are my custom hooks, which I created. And yeah, everything just works. Let's have a look at another one. Maybe front page. Let's see. Oops. Front page. Does that use any state? No, it doesn't. Do we have one that does that? Yeah, well, I guess the view selector does. Yes. So here we can see use state for like simple state that's needed to be managed by the component itself is in here. Yeah. So how fast is this? How fast is reconciliation? It's like the library itself is super tiny. We can see here's the source code. It's basically this index file, which isn't much. And then you have element, which is the mother load of the code, which is like 250 lines of code. Then you have component. Oh, it's pretty much just as big. But the thing is, it doesn't have like classes and other concepts like context and all that stuff, because it doesn't really need to. And what's also really cool about this is that when it's so tightly integrated with overmind, we can do things like, as we can see here inside the component. Here we are. So this is where when the component actually has an update because it's tracking some state, we can actually see if that update is asynchronous. And that means that, okay, since it's asynchronous, we don't really have to update the component right away. So what we do here is that we check if it's async, and if there's no current async batching of rendering happening, we can do a request animation frame, and then we actually update the component. And that means that maybe there's more updates coming to the component in the meantime, and when it actually does the reconciliation and updates the DOM, it's at the optimal time. It's at the request animation frame time. So that's really cool, and that's something you cannot really do with other approaches, but with overmind and this overmind components, we can actually do that. So it's really hard to benchmark like what's the pure performance of the reconciliation, what optimizations has been put in place. Like this library does have keys and stuff to optimize and caching elements and stuff like that, but it could do more, which I guess React and like Inferno, there's a ton of stuff to do, crazy optimizations. But then you have like, okay, but how effective is it at actually updating, like doing the mutations on the DOM? That's also something you can benchmark. And then it's also like, what about the real life application? Like with all this tracking in place, like none of the components will update unless the props passed to it changes, or there's some tracked state that updates. So in a real application, you would it's just automatically optimized. So you will, in this solution, you will have a lot more individual components updating than you will have like a tree of updates. But how do you like benchmark that? So what I'm doing is I refactor the website, and I'm now refactoring the DevTools, which is an even more complex application. And the goal here, as I mentioned, is that it's about the developer experience. It's not about creating the fastest virtual DOM library out there, because I don't think it needs to be, because it optimizes in more application-specific ways, if that makes sense. So yeah, this is basically what I want to show you. After I'm done refactoring the DevTools, I'm going to push and merge this stuff in, and I think we can work on this together. It's not that complex, the code. Yeah, it also has delegated events in place. And here are the hooks. We can extend with some more hooks if we want to do that. And it also has some really awesome testing, because I have a test renderer which actually tracks exactly what updates it does to the DOM. So we can measure and figure out, like, does it do the minimal amount of DOM updates? Like, there's no batching of DOM updates now. Maybe that could be implemented. But again, as I said, I'm not sure if it's really necessary. But anyways, I'm starting to ramble. So this is what I want to show you. And hopefully you think it's cool. And I can get some help settling this. And this can be one of the views inside in overmind. So you have, like, the default view is the actual overmind components package, but then you can use overmind with the other libraries as well if you want to do that. If you want to be part of the ecosystem of the other libraries, if you value that more. Okay, cool, thanks.